On August 20th, 1989, two brothers from Beverly Hills went to the movie theater. They bought tickets for Batman. Then the young men returned home and discovered that their parents had been brutally murdered in their own residence. At least that's how it appeared from the outside. This is the story of the Menendez Brothers, which has captivated the minds of Americans for over 3 decades. Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. This story shattered the image of the perfect American family and gave rise to one of the most controversial trials in true crime history. Who were Eric and Lyle Menendez? Cold-blooded killers or two broken sons driven to the edge? Almost at midnight on August 20th, 1989, a call came into the police department in the luxurious Beverly Hills area on 911. On the other end of the line was 21-year-old Lyle Menendez. His voice was noticeably trembling. Usually 911 dispatchers in this area received calls about alarm activations or suspicious persons on the street. So the operator was caught off guard when he heard Lyle's words on the other end of the line that someone had shot his parents. After this message, the dispatcher was stunned for a couple of seconds and only, recovering from the initial shock, relayed the incident address to the patrol services. House number 722, North Elm Drive, Beverly Hills. This was not just a house, it was a huge mansion, a sign of wealth, a beautiful Spanish-style estate spanning 840 square meters, with 7 bedrooms located on a well-maintained lot surrounded by palm trees. The building's roof was covered with red tiles and evoked the charm of old Hollywood. The elaborate structure itself indicated the financial well-being of the home's owners. However, for the Menendez family, this was just a house, and now the scale of horror inside the mansion shocked even seasoned officers. The scene was very disturbing. One of the investigators later admitted that he had seen many crimes, but none as brutal as this. Blood, flesh, splatters of brain matter on the walls. The bodies of the married couple who owned the mansion were practically unrecognizable, so mutilated were they. The head of this ideal family, Jose Menendez, suffered the most. The influential entertainment company executive was found in the living room. He had been shot in the face with a shotgun at close range. In total, he received 6 gunshot wounds. His wife, housewife Kitty Menendez, a former beauty queen, lay mortally wounded near the sofa. Kitty received 10 gunshot wounds. Before the bullet hit her cheek, it appeared the woman had tried to crawl across the floor. Both Jose and Kitty had several horrific wounds inflicted after death. Due to its brutality, the crime initially seemed like the work of the mafia, but at the same time, the mutilations could have been made to create the appearance of a gangster attack or a contract killing. What really happened in this wealthy mansion still needed to be figured out. Police, forensics experts, and homicide detectives gradually filled the house. Everyone had the same questions on their minds. Who could have done this? Who would dare commit a crime in such a prestigious neighborhood? Was it a robbery, or did the attack have more personal motives? Even to investigators, the Menendez family seemed untouchable at first glance, living in a privileged position. And such violence never happened to people like them. When a sergeant from the Beverly Hills Police Department spoke with the brothers that evening, they already had an alibi ready. After the movies, they went to a festival in India, returned home shortly before midnight, and stumbled upon their parents' bodies in the living room. The detective found the brothers' statements and their emotional state so plausible that he didn't ask them to take a gunpowder residue test. But as the night dragged on, and the following days, investigators looked more closely at the details. And the focus of their suspicions shifted from an act of random violence, a gang attack as the Sun suggested, to the idea that all these atrocities were committed by someone close to the Menendez family. The crime in the prestigious Beverly Hills neighborhood made headlines in all media, and all eyes were on Lyle and Eric, who had suddenly lost both parents. They were just 2 young men who had abruptly become orphans. Eric and Lyle spoke with reporters, friends, family, and relatives, sharing their grief, shock, and dismay. And everyone sympathized with them, and expressed their love and support. One memorial service for friends and company employees was held in Los Angeles. A second memorial service was organized in Princeton for family and close friends. Eric and Lyle arrived in their best suits and looked utterly crushed by grief. When one of the sons, Lyle, delivered a eulogy in a broken voice, fondly recalling his parents, everyone could see how he was suffering. Eric was too upset to speak at the ceremony in front of everyone, but in any case, all those present shared this tragedy with the guys. People who lose a loved one behave differently. Some withdraw into themselves and refuse communication. Others, on the contrary, seek to have friends and loved ones around them all the time. Everyone grieves in their own way. However, for Lyle and Eric, grief looked different from that of most people who had buried their mother and father. After the tragic death of their parents, the brothers seemed to celebrate the event by going on a shopping spree. These were not small purchases. These were big spendings that sparked a lot of talk. Apparently, the guys figured that the best way for the sole heirs of a $14 million estate to cope with the death of their father and mother was to start managing the finances at their own discretion. A few days after the funerals and over the following months, the young men simply spent the $1 million insurance payout. Lyle bought a fancy Porsche for $64,000, and Eric bought himself a new Jeep Wrangler. The brothers often went out, bought frequent Rolex watches, designer clothes, expensive jewelry. They flew first class on luxurious trips. They went to Las Vegas, played high-stakes gambling. In general, they lived it up to the fullest. But it didn't stop there. The brothers invested their wealth in various business projects. For example, Lyle spent $550,000 to buy a restaurant in Princeton, which he named Mr. Buffalo. And Eric tried to invest $40,000 in a concert promotion company, which ultimately turned out to be a scam. None of it mattered, because the children of wealthy parents were finally doing what they had long dreamed of. And now no one was stopping them. The brothers Menendez's extravagant spending was followed not only by the public and press, but also by detectives. Such behavior seemed extremely suspicious to them. Why did two young men crushed by grief so easily and quickly come to terms with the death of both parents? At the crime scene, investigators found some inconsistencies. At the time of the crime, the Menendez mansion was securely protected. The family had one of the best security systems of the time. Yet the alarm was simply turned off, and there were no signs of forced entry. Although the house was in disarray and it seemed like robbers were searching for valuables, in reality, almost nothing was missing. Inside the mansion, there were plenty of expensive interior items, jewelry, and cash, but it all remained in place. Investigators began to suspect that it was all staged to create the appearance of a burglary. A survey of neighbors showed that the head of the house, Jose, had many enemies. He was disliked at work. People said he was very cruel, constantly arguing with everyone and intolerant of others' mistakes. One family friend suggested that the Menendez couple's death might involve their children. He had no evidence, just a hunch. According to the witness, relations between the sons and their parents were always strained. Then, the police discovered something strange. It turned out that on August 31st, 11 days after the tragedy in the mansion, the brothers called a computer expert to delete a file from their mother's computer. Most likely, it was a new family will, in which it was assumed Lyle and Eric were not mentioned. The computer expert did his job, but realizing that an investigation into the deaths of two people was ongoing, decided to cover himself. He contacted the police and told them about the Menendez brothers' request, thereby strengthening the investigators' suspicions. Eric, the younger brother, struggled with anxiety and stress all this time after his parents' death. On October 31st, 1989, he couldn't take it anymore and turned to his psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. First, they met and took a short walk in Beverly Hills. The guy complained that he was experiencing terrible depression, haunted by thoughts of suicide. Dr. Oziel suggested going to his office to discuss the problem. But before entering the room, Eric leaned against the wall and said bluntly, "We did it. We killed our parents." The psychologist was shocked, but didn't show it. He invited Eric into the office and began asking questions. That's when the young man started sharing some dark secrets from the home. First, Eric told Dr. Oziel about watching a TV series about a billionaire's club. Billionaire's Club is a crime story from high society life turned into a miniseries that aired in 1987. It told of wealthy young people from Los Angeles who committed a serious crime for financial gain. After watching the film, Eric felt a kind of inspiration. He went to his older brother and shared his conviction that their parents were going to exclude them from the will and that the brothers would no longer be able to claim the inheritance. It went so far that the young men decided to get rid of their strict father, who poisoned their lives with his prohibitions, and then kill their mother so she wouldn't turn them in to the police. Further, Eric told the doctor how he and Lyle went to a large sporting goods store in San Diego and, using a stolen ID, bought two 12-gauge shotguns. The brothers came up with an alibi to create the impression that they were at the movies when robbers attacked their home. So, after shooting their father and mother, the young men collected the shotgun shells and went to a nearby canyon to dispose of the weapons. Then, they took their bloodied clothes and shoes and threw them away with the shells in a dumpster at a gas station. The guys weren't worried about fingerprints or shoe prints because it was their home, and the presence of fingerprints wouldn't raise questions from anyone. Dr. Oziel, having listened to Eric, asked him to call his brother and invite him to a session too so they could discuss the situation together. When Lyle rushed to the psychologist, he was furious. The older brother even threatened the doctor with retribution if he told anyone the information he heard from Eric. Dr. Oziel managed to choose his words and continued the sessions. Eric shared increasingly dark details that made it possible to understand why it all happened. The psychologist made detailed notes and recorded the sessions on tape. Meanwhile, investigators were doing everything to get some irrefutable evidence against the brothers because they were really convinced of their involvement in the crime. The case wasn't moving forward until in March 1990, a certain Miss Judilon Smith called the police. Initially, Judilon went to Dr. Oziel for therapy and hypnosis sessions, but then it turned into a romantic affair. The psychologist was married, but like most who cheat, Oziel told his former patient that she was the love of his life and that he would leave his wife for her. Naturally, he was lying. At some point, the secret romance bored Oziel because he had no intention of destroying his family. And the mistress, who knew about the psychologist's sessions with the Menendez brothers, went to the police and told everything she knew. This was exactly what the investigators wanted. On March 8, 1990, the lead detective on the Menendez case, based on a tip from Dr. Oziel's former lover, obtained a warrant to seize his tape recordings. By the way, this same detective had previously handled the Billionaire's Club case, the series about which greatly impressed Eric and essentially became the impetus for developing the criminal plan. Dr. Oziel's audio recordings were confiscated. There were 17 audio cassettes and 7 pages of notes. Thanks to this, detectives had the Menendez brothers' confessions to the murder of their mother and father. Now the young men could not deny their involvement. Under normal circumstances, the law would deem the session recordings inadmissible in court, given the confidentiality between therapists and clients. However, the threat of retribution made by Lyle to the doctor stripped them of the doctor-client privilege. That same day, police stopped Lyle's brand-new Jeep on the way to a restaurant. The young man was taken into custody on suspicion of murdering his parents. His brother Eric was in Israel at a tennis tournament at the time. Since Lyle's arrest became world news, Eric hurried home to avoid being detained in another country. And 3 days later, upon returning to Los Angeles, he turned himself in to the police. After the massacre of their mother and father, the brothers roamed free for nearly 7 months. So why did the two sons commit a crime against their closest people? Did they do it just for money? Was it ordinary greed, or was there some other reason? To understand the Menendez brothers' story, let's go back a few years. So, the head of the family and father of Eric and Lyle was Jose Enrique Menendez. He was born in Havana, Cuba, in 1944. Fleeing the upheavals of the Cuban Revolution, the 16-year-old teenager went to the United States. Jose possessed superhuman determination and was full of resolve to succeed. He carved his own path to the top, from dishwasher in Manhattan to executive at a film studio on the West Coast. Jose enrolled at Southern Illinois University, where he met Kitty Anderson. At 19, he married Kitty, who was 2 years older. After the wedding, the newlyweds moved to New York, where Jose worked tirelessly to earn a degree in accounting. At first, people seemed to really like Jose's determination and assertiveness. These qualities helped him stand out from the crowd and quickly climb the career ladder, from accountant to corporate executive. In 1971, Jose began working at the American car rental company Hertz as head of a division, and 2 years later, he was promoted to CFO of the company. In 1979, 35-year-old Jose Menendez became the global general manager of the corporation, and the following year, he was appointed president of the parent company, RCA Records. Jose's job involved signing contracts with famous artists like Duran Duran, U2, Rick James, and even the boy band Menudo. Menendez was known for his aggressive, tough business style. He always believed it was better to inspire fear than to earn love and favor. This strategy helped Jose achieve a lot and amass a fortune. By 1986, the Menendez family had moved to Los Angeles, and in 1988, they bought a luxurious mansion in the upscale Beverly Hills neighborhood. Kitty Menendez, real name Mary Louise Anderson, over time grew accustomed to being in her husband's shadow. When she was younger, she won the Miss Oak Lawn beauty pageant, but as Jose's wife, she had to accept second roles. Kitty was described as a glamorous lady with a somewhat rebellious character. For Jose, Kitty embodied the American dream he always aspired to. Jose himself was then a beloved man, ready to overcome anything for his goals. That's what attracted Kitty. But her family didn't take to her future son-in-law because he was Cuban. However, the lovers didn't care much. They left everything and moved to another city. At first, Kitty worked as a teacher, but after the birth of Lyle in 1968 and Eric in 1970, she put her career aside to become a housewife and devote all her time to raising her sons. In reality, Kitty dreamed of working in television or radio, but Jose insisted she focus on the children. Kitty's childhood was not the best. Her father treated his wife and children very harshly. After getting married, the girl dreamed of becoming independent from her parents. But her husband's character was no picnic either, so Kitty struggled with depression and resentment her whole life. As Jose's career took off, he spent more time at work. Associating with many women led to him having affairs. Jose had several romances that Kitty learned about, and it was a devastating blow to her. The woman couldn't leave her husband because she was completely dependent on him. To somehow numb the emotional pain, she became addicted to alcohol and illicit drugs. Over the years, she developed a strong dependency. At times, Kitty even contemplated suicide, especially when she learned about Jose's 8-year affair with a woman from New York. So publicly, Kitty supported her husband's ambitions, but inside the family, the atmosphere was unhealthy. The woman was completely absorbed in her husband's goals, but at the same time, she was completely isolated and dependent on Jose in everything. For Lyle and Eric, growing up with such parents was very stressful. Jose's drive to succeed in all areas of his life was reflected in his sons as well. The man demanded constant improvement from the boys. He didn't just expect the children to continue his business. Jose put pressure on them. The man wanted to see successful sons by his side and wouldn't hear any objections. The elder Menendez not only enrolled the brothers in an expensive private school, but also paid for their tennis lessons 3 times a week so they could excel in the elite sport, and even brought professional coaches home. Unfortunately, Neither Eric nor Lyle seemed to share their father's passionate desire to succeed. For Lyle and Eric, life revolved around tennis competitions. From a young age, both boys were relentlessly drilled. Jose managed their schedules, coaches, diets. He controlled everything down to the smallest details. First, it was an ironclad path to getting a scholarship. Second, a way to prove to everyone that Jose created winners and his sons were the best. Jose Menendez suffered from perfectionism. This was reflected in his family life as well. It exhausted all the household members mentally, so Lyle and Eric sometimes had it hard. However, the pressure from their father went far beyond the tennis court. He controlled every aspect of his sons' lives, dictating what subjects they chose in school, what books to read, and who to associate with. Jose monitored their phone calls and had an obsessive need to know every step they took. Any disappointment or imperfection triggered a rage attack in the man. The father showed the sons that their worth directly depended on their achievements. Outwardly, Eric and Lyle seemed like confident athletes, but inside, both guys struggled. The older brother, Lyle, developed a stutter in childhood, a speech defect exacerbated by stress. People said his stutter was a result of anxiety. He was often seen as a leader, a ringleader. He was bold and ready to challenge teachers, coaches, and especially his father. But behind his displayed determination hid deep insecurity. Eric, the younger brother, was considered more sensitive, vulnerable, and quiet. In childhood, he also stuttered badly, was shy, withdrawn, especially when his father was around. Eric respected his older brother and always relied on him for protection. The younger one couldn't stand up for himself and was seen as the more vulnerable of the two. When the boys went to school, they mostly stood out for their successes. Once, Jose and Kitty were called from the school and told that their sons were doing poorly in studies. The children had problems with concentration and retaining information. Lyle was labeled a rule breaker. He was cheeky and capricious, and quiet Eric had a harder time studying in school, which made him a target of his father's criticism and anger. When parents were informed about the kids' behavior problems and poor academics, Jose didn't talk to his sons. Instead, he went to the school and started yelling at the teachers and principal, blaming them for the boys' poor performance. Constant control and aggression led to the young men starting to break the law. In 1988, Lyle and Eric committed several burglaries in their neighborhood, stealing over $100,000 in cash and jewelry for the thrill. After that, Jose moved the family to another place to avoid gossip. Father's disappointment reached such a level that he practically wrote his children out of the will. Lyle was studying at Princeton University, where he was put on probation for poor grades and then expelled altogether. For a while, he lived in a dorm. Not wanting to share a room with anyone, the guy simply threw his roommate's things into the hallway. Other students complained that Lyle left the water running in the sinks, leading to a flood. And then, in violation of dorm rules, he repainted the room to his own taste. But all this was just childish mischief from the brothers compared to what they did to get rid of their parents. So, after the double tragedy at the Menendez residence, the public first saw two grieving sons crushed by sorrow, then two extravagant, spendthrift, greedy, selfish young men. But the public didn't yet know what had really been going on behind the walls of this mansion for many years. And finally, the truth came out from Eric Menendez himself. When investigators listened to the audio recordings of Eric's sessions with the psychologist, they learned many new and even more wild things that had happened in this family. During conversations with Dr. Osiel, the young man shared many details about his upbringing. Jose and Kitty were actually terrible parents. They weren't just strict, but sick and cruel people. And over the years, the situation in the house only worsened, and Jose's unbridled character turned discipline into outright violence. Jose Menendez was described as a man who established a reign of terror in the home, where physical intimidation served as a tool to impose his absolute will. Later, The brothers testified that their father beat them not only with his fists, but with any objects that came to hand. He forced them to play tennis even if the teenagers were seriously injured, and brutally punished them if they violated discipline at school or practice in any way. If the sons didn't meet Jose's incredibly high standards, they faced criticism, bullying, and humiliation. The father often openly compared the brothers, making them hate each other. Mother Kitty, Eric, and Lyle also accused of physical abuse. Of course, she wasn't as evil as the father, but she too often slapped the sons or hit them with her fists if they angered her. In reality, Kitty was overwhelmed by her own problems, so at some point she stepped aside and allowed Jose to dominate the house. She didn't care about anything. Naturally, her behavior was influenced by alcohol and illicit drugs. But the most devastating and controversial admission from the brothers were accusations of intimate abuse to which Jose Menendez subjected them. Both Lyle and Eric testified under oath that their father abused them for many years, starting from when Eric was 7 years old and up to the crime in the mansion. The guys described numerous instances of molestation, coercion, and psychological manipulation that left deep trauma in their souls. And this became their dark secret that pushed them to the limit and led to the crime. During the trial, other witnesses also testified about what they knew. So the boys' cousin Diane testified that when they were about 8 years old, Lyle mentioned in conversation that his father had touched his private parts. When Diane told Kitty about it, she just brushed it off, saying it was nonsense. The mother simply didn't believe the girl and forbade talking about such topics. The boy's cousin Alan testified that Jose Menendez took showers with his sons. To another cousin, Andy, 13-year-old Eric confided in secret that his father massaged his genitals but asked him not to tell anyone. One of the most significant pieces of evidence was a letter Eric sent to his cousin Andy in 1988. The young man wrote that he was afraid of his father because he came to him at nights. Quote from the letter, "Andy, it's still going on, but now it's even worse for me. I can't explain it. He's so fat, I can't stand him. I never know when it's going to happen, and it's driving me crazy. Every night I sleep thinking he might come again. I don't know if I can take it." By the way, this letter is considered incredibly important evidence that the brothers didn't invent the acts of violence in the home just to justify their actions. Unfortunately, this key evidence was not included in the initial trial, and in recent years has become a sort of central argument for lawyers seeking new hearings. Where was their mother all this time while Jose was corrupting his sons? Apparently, Kitty didn't want to interfere at all. In fact, the woman not only knew about the ongoing violence but sometimes was present during it or stayed in the next room to make sure no one entered. Kitty condoned her husband's abnormal behavior and sought to keep it all secret to not ruin the family's public image. The mother's attitude toward her sons only exacerbated their emotional trauma. Lyle and Eric felt betrayed by both parents. From birth, they fell into a trap from which there was no escape. Interestingly, the brothers were so afraid of their father that they didn't even share their experiences with each other. Eric first told Lyle about the molestations 3 weeks before the massacre, and Lyle in turn confessed to his brother that Jose started abusing him for 6 years, but stopped without explanation when he turned 8. The brothers decided to finally voice their claims to their father, and in the end, Jose threatened to kill them if they told anyone. And Kitty said Eric made it all up, which, according to the brothers, became the motive for the crime. In 1988, a year before Jose and Kitty's death, Eric Menendez and his friends wrote a script called Friends, in which the main character, a wealthy teenager, got rid of his parents to inherit their fortune. Although the script itself was mediocre, it became an important element of the investigation because the events in the script closely resembled the real crime whose victims were the author's parents. When all this information surfaced, the public's perception of the Menendez family turned upside down. At first, everyone pitied Jose and Kitty, victims of their own sons, but when Lyle and Eric's testimonies were voiced in court, People began to sympathize with them because it wasn't about greed, but about decades of constant fear. All this caused shock in the judicial system and society. The 1993 trial of the Menendez brothers became a television spectacle. When the broadcast began, viewers in the United States eagerly awaited this historic moment. Due to the tragic details of the case, the public had heightened interest in this story. Viewers couldn't tear themselves away from the screens. At first, the media was full of headlines about millionaire youths and son killers. People were curious to see two spoiled rich guys who shot their parents for money. But then, when the first trial began, and the defense presented a version of decades of physical, emotional, and intimate abuse by Jose and Kitty, opinions shifted sharply. According to California law, the brothers could be found guilty of manslaughter only if they proved they faced imminent danger. Lyle and Eric's lawyers insisted that the brothers were not just criminals craving profit, but, on the contrary, intimidated victims pushed to the brink. The defense team relied on a then-novel legal concept, the battered child syndrome or child abuse syndrome. This is a psychological and medical term used to describe the physical and emotional symptoms experienced by children subjected to prolonged abuse, often from parents or guardians. Over time, they may develop a deep sense of helplessness and distorted perception of reality. Such people live in constant fear and believe escape is impossible, leading in turn to extreme measures. The defense team for Eric and Lyle argued that the brothers suffered from this syndrome and genuinely believed their father threatened their lives. That is, the defendants openly, albeit unreasonably, believed they faced imminent danger and acted to protect themselves. According to Lyle and Eric, every day they lived held a threat. Every moment in Jose's presence felt like a ticking time bomb to them. The defense argued that the brothers had no other choice, and it wasn't about getting parental money, but rather survival. Jose had good connections. He was very influential, and the brothers were terrified of what would happen if they tried to seek help. The prosecution, however, argued that Eric and Lyle killed their parents out of greed to inherit their wealth. And the cohesive story of domestic abuse was fabricated specifically to avoid punishment. Although no past abuse can justify such a cold-blooded act by sons toward their father and mother. The prosecution called Lyle's ex-girlfriend, who testified that Lyle offered her a large sum of money to claim that Jose Menendez had made advances on her. And before that, the guy told tall tales about how the mafia shot his parents. So if viewed from another angle, the brothers' stories didn't seem 100% truthful. However, when Eric Menendez testified, many people watching really felt his pain. The guy cried, describing in horrific detail what his father did to him for many years. Due to the amount of detail he went into, it was very hard to believe it was all made up. Lyle was more reserved in court and better controlled his emotions. Some considered the young man more cold-blooded, but most saw in his behavior a sign of deeper emotional suppression. Since the entire process was broadcast live, every sigh, every tear, cough, every movement was scrutinized. And it was just a national obsession. After months of testimonies and heated discussions, the jury reached a deadlock. They couldn't come to a unanimous decision, which meant the trial was annulled. This was seen as a partial victory for the brothers, but on the other hand, it meant they would have to go through it all again in another trial. The second trial differed drastically from the first. It received less coverage, partly because the judge didn't allow video filming in the courtroom and also stated that graphic and detailed descriptions of past abuse weren't directly related to the crime, so he limited testimony on some claims of mistreatment in the Menendez family. The defense portrayed Jose as a cruel, violence-prone father, an unfaithful husband, and accused Kitty of substance abuse and neglecting parental duties. However, ultimately, the defense couldn't present irrefutable evidence on any of these accusations, and the brothers' habit of high-fiving each other after testifying certainly didn't help their credibility. In the end, on March 20, 1996, Lyle and Eric Menendez were found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. They were to spend the rest of their lives behind bars. By the time of the life sentence, Lyle Menendez was already 28 years old, and Eric Menendez was 25. The brothers' path through the prison system was marked by both difficulties and changes. Initially, they were deliberately separated, and the separation was so hard that Eric went on a hunger strike trying to achieve reunification with Lyle. After spending over 20 years in different prisons, the Menendez brothers reunited in 2018 when Lyle was transferred to the facility where Eric was serving his sentence. In prison, both brothers embarked on a path of personal development and, in a sense, redemption. Lyle earned a bachelor's degree in sociology and is now pursuing a master's. He worked for 15 years on the prison council, where inmates are allowed to participate in decisions about their daily lives, the institution's operations, and representing peers' interests. Lyle Menendez actively participated in improving prison conditions, advocated for inmates' rights, helped implement rehabilitation, education, and community development programs behind bars. Eric, in prison, became interested in religious studies. He led Bible study classes and even became a minister. Eric worked with terminally ill inmates, providing them comfort and care at the end of life. He also became an advocate for teenagers who survived abuse. He mentored other inmates with similar trauma and contributed to educational work behind bars. Both brothers got married. Lyle Menendez's first marriage was to Anna Erickson, a former model and beauty salon administrator. The couple later divorced because the wife suspected her husband of infidelity. With his second wife, Rebecca Sneed, Lyle met through correspondence and communicated with her for about 10 years. In 2024, the couple separated. Eric also met the love of his life, Tani Ruda Sakamoto, through correspondence. Their regular letter communication led to them meeting in person. During one of the woman's visits to the prison, Eric got down on one knee in front of her and proposed. They got married and even co-wrote and edited a book about their marriage. Despite the ban on conjugal visits, the couple is still together. Both brothers are often called model inmates. Lyle said his own childhood surprisingly prepared him well for the chaos of prison life. For many years, Eric and Lyle tried to file appeals, but they were constantly denied. Most likely, their fate was sealed. In recent years, interest in the Menendez case has sharply increased. There are many reasons for the renewed popularity. The trials attracted international media attention and inspired numerous documentaries, dramatizations, books, and parodies. Here's just a small part of them. In 2017, Eric and Lyle became subjects of the documentary Truth and Lies: The Menendez Brothers, American Sons, American Killers. In the same year, a new series, How It Really Happened, with Hill Harper aired, with an episode dedicated to the Menendez brothers' story. In 2020, the brothers were featured in a special episode of How They Caught. In 2021, Lyle and Eric became subjects of a special release called Inside the Menendez Movement, which covered the brothers' popularity on the social network TikTok and the growing number of supporters among youth, both in the US and abroad. Then there was the Netflix dramatic series Monsters: The Lyle and Eric Menendez Story. And in 2024, the documentary The Menendez Brothers, with prison interviews of the brothers, was released. All this attracted a new generation of viewers to the case, many of whom didn't even know the full scale of the abuse allegations. After decades, new accusations emerged from Roy Rosselló, a former member of the popular boy band Menudo. Roy testified in 2023 that as a young boy, he was repeatedly molested by Jose Menendez. At the time, Jose was organizing tours for the popular boy band. Once, Roy was brought to the Menendez mansion, where Jose plied him with wine laced with illicit substances. There were other incidents after that. Roy's accusations came much later than the trial of Eric and Lyle, but they represented third-party testimony of Jose's predatory behavior and only added weight and credibility to the brothers' statements. Around the same time, a letter surfaced that Eric wrote to his cousin in 1988, months before the attack on his parents, describing his father's molestations. The letter was found by chance in the cousin's old things. Thus, interest in the forgotten case grew. All public discussions and online debates coincided with new legal efforts by the brothers' defense. Eric and Lyle's lawyers argue that if these pieces of evidence were presented to the jury today, they would most likely lead to a different outcome, possibly to conviction for manslaughter. In October 2024, the Los Angeles County Prosecutor's Office began reviewing the case, acknowledging the complexity of the circumstances surrounding the brothers' abuse. The district attorney recommended resentencing or even holding a new trial, but then everything changed. A new district attorney appeared in Los Angeles, who rejected all previous recommendations and opposed a new trial. But very recently, on May 13, 2025, a Los Angeles Superior Court judge finally issued a new sentence for Lyle and Eric Menendez. Their prison term was reduced to 50 years to life. That is, after serving 50 years, the brothers will be eligible for parole. At the time of the crime, neither was 26 yet, and the new sentence gave them the right to release on youth offender parole in accordance with California's laws on juvenile offenders. At the heart of the Menendez brothers' crime lie two contradictory narratives. On one hand, the prosecution portrayed Lyle and Eric as two cold-blooded, calculating criminals who shot their own parents for a multi-million-dollar inheritance and then staged a public display of fake grief. On the other hand, the defense presents testimonies of two deeply traumatized young men who endured years of brutal physical, emotional, and intimate abuse from their closest people. To this day, many wonder whether Lyle and Eric Menendez are guilty, or whether they became victims of horrific abuse, driven to a breaking point and deserving a different outcome. What do you think about this? If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.